In 500 feet, turn right on North General Bruce Drive. In 600 feet, turn left on Loop 363, HK Dodgen Loop. Then turn right. Turn left on Loop 363, HK Dodgen Loop. Then use the in half a mile, stay to the left to I-35 North toward Waco.
Oh, thank you, Debbie. I appreciate that.
to turn your nest egg into a paycheck with half the amount you've been led to believe. Fluent Financial combines in-house portfolio design and risk management with income-generating investments designed to accelerate your financial independence. Our goal is to develop an effective portfolio strategy to help you retire sooner and have a better lifestyle. Visit fluentfinancial.com.
Forgive me if you've heard something like this commentary in the last week, because I did something like this a week ago, and a few weeks before that, and a few weeks before that. Now, the information's going to be new, but the feeling of how disturbed I am with the way the Cowboys are doing business, that feeling is old, very old. The Cowboys, it appears, still did not learn the lesson of last year, or of several years previous to that. The players that held out on the Cowboys got what they wanted. It was simply a question of them waiting out the Cowboys. Whether that be Emmitt Smith or Zach Martin or Dak Prescott last year or CeeDee Lamb last year, hey, Dak is the highest paid player in the league at $60 million. Now, I don't want to diss Dak Prescott, but where does he rank in the best players in the league? He gets the most money. And CeeDee Lamb is getting the second most money for a wide receiver. And by the way, both those contracts have already been redone this year to create salary space. But on the horizon is another huge contract for Micah Parsons. The Cowboys say they've had good conversations with Parsons. Well, how good? It's been right at 3 months since the Cowboys' 7-10 season ended with a loss in Washington. When the season ended, the highest paid non-quarterback in the league.
Police reported ahead.
Non-quarterback in the league was Minnesota wide receiver Justin Jefferson at $35 million. Well, it wasn't long into the offseason until the Raiders defensive end Max Crosby signed his new contract for just a little more than Justin Jefferson, $35.5 million. And then Cleveland really moved the needle, giving Sackmaster defensive end Myles Garrett 4 years and $160 million, $40 million a year. But that figure didn't last long, because Cincinnati wide receiver Jamar Chase then upped the amount for the highest paid non-quarterback in the league to $40.25 million. Yeah, I know, $250 million, but it gives them the right to say, hey, I'm the highest paid player in the NFL that isn't quarterback. And by the way, meanwhile, Houston Texans defensive end Danielle Hunter got a 1-year extension for $35.6 million. What do the Cowboys have to show for their good conversations with Parsons right now? Squat. Diddly. Buckus. But Parsons, he's noticed what's happening in this league. He's noticed the prices go up and up and up and up. Now he's talking about being the first non-quarterback to be a $200 million man. I'm assuming that would mean 5 years for a bit over $200 million, which would bring Parsons to perhaps $41 or $42 million a year. Okay. Meanwhile, the Cowboys signed a bunch of free agents this offseason. They don't have Parsons' contract, and he just sits there flashing his $200 million money.
For more than 3 decades, Bob's Steak and Chop House has remained an icon in DFW restaurants. Why? Well, maybe it's because of Bob. He's fanatical about cleanliness and friendliness, and his food, oh my lord, is good. If you've been there, you know about it. If you haven't been there, you should know about it. The original Bob welcomes you at either of his 2 locations, Bob's on London Avenue or the sparkling new Bob's at Great Range McKinney. Are you struggling to cook healthy meals that actually taste good? Not sure what seasonings go together to make your food pop? Well, let's be honest. You need something quick and easy for your instead. And Opa, Opa has you covered. Introducing Opa Seasoning. Mary just loves them on meat, fish, chicken, veggies, salads. Just sprinkle, enjoy, and you will love Opa. You get it easily. You go to the website, opafoods.com, OPAfoods.com. Use the promo NORM, and you get 10% off your order. And here's the best part. A portion of every purchase goes to Awesome Streets, shelter for the homeless, helping those in need while you enjoy great food, delicious meals, great coffee, and savings. What's not to love? Try Opa today.
Next, the Cowboys are suggesting that the 8 free agents they've added and the 2 players they traded for, that give them the situation where they are now free to draft the best player available at number 12 in the first round, instead of drafting for need. Pardon me while I giggle just a little bit. They've signed and traded for 10 guys, but only one of them looks like he's going to start. And that's linebacker Kenneth Murray, who's on his third team in 3 years. And he, like 8 other acquisitions, he is on a 1-year contract, free to leave after this season, unless the Cowboys sign him again. But the Cowboys are right. They don't have to draft for any specific need, because they have so many needs: running back, defensive tackle, cornerback, wide receiver, offensive tackle, defensive end, that virtually anybody they draft is going to fill a need, a real need on this team. And a reminder that the last 2 number ones, Ozzie Smith and Tyler Guyton, have not filled needs well at all. Finally, the Cowboys have put the pedal to the metal without brakes and are headed over the salary cap cliff again. I know the 25 season isn't even near here, but let me take you to 2026. Here's the Cowboys' current contracts for that year. You're going to hear 8 of them. Dak Prescott's contract this year, he's due $78 million. CeeDee Lamb, $38 million. Let's say Parsons comes in at $40 million. Osa Odighizuwa with his new contract, $20 million. Trayvon Diggs, cornerback, $18.5 million. The tackle Terrence Steele, $18 million. Tyler Smith, projected for his 5th-year option, will make $21 million. And finally, you know the Cowboys want to keep Deron Bland, the cornerback. Well, the prices for cornerbacks have gone way past $20 million. But let's even let Bland be there at $20 million a year. That's 8 players. Total monies against the cap, $255 million. The cap this year is $279 million. Now it'll go up next year. The cap always goes up. This gives the Cowboys nearly enough room to maneuver in free agency. And by the way, that $255 million against the cap, that doesn't count the dead money left over from the contract of Zach Martin. $255 million. 8 players. There's no way you can make that work. So what do the Cowboys do in the next offseason? Well, they kick the can in the butt further down the road again. They reach a point they can almost do nothing to fill the holes in free agency. Like this past season, when the Cowboys drove their silver and blue bus right over the salary cap cliff and crashed.
Today's episode brought to you by Fluent Financial. Retire sooner, better lifestyle by Bob's Steak and Chop House. And by Opa Seasonings. Savor the flavor in your food.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Just Wondering with Warren Business. If you enjoyed what you heard, please hit follow and a fresh new episode will be delivered to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And if you know someone who might enjoy our work, please share it with them. I'm Norm Hitzkes, and I'm always just wondering about something.
And I'm Mary Hitchkes, and I'm just wondering too. The Joe Rogan Experience.
Try my name, Joe Rogan!
You're listening to Weather Brains. They're kind of a big deal. Bill Curtis, he says you're a big deal. Maybe, maybe not. Hey, this is Weather Brains episode 1002. The weekly show that is all about weather. The world's oldest, longest running weather podcast. 19 years, 1002 episodes. We are in March 31st, 2025. We are almost a third of the way out of meteorological spring here as the spring season cruises along. And let's go down to Troy Kimball. I bet it's already 107 down in Austin. How hot is it down?
Well, you know how my Mondays is going when you talk about this is the longest, the oldest. I thought you were going to say profession. And then I thought, no, that wouldn't work out so well. But, who would have thought we'd been 1,002, you know?
Hey, we're just getting started. That's what we said in show 1000. We're just getting started here. So let's go to Dr. James Alot in Tulsa Town. He was gearing up for severe weather, tomorrow and Wednesday?
Yeah, maybe Thursday and Friday in southeast Oklahoma. So, yeah. See, that's the
Red alert.
I'm ready. I got the stash coffee and the OU flag hanging. So, we were 56 today. That's the coolest high temp we've had since the first week of March.
Yeah, right. We'll take that. I noticed that James has the Ark Building 101 book, Ark Building for Dummies, in case he has to build an ark to survive the heavy rain there. We're going to have a ridge while we have this persistent band of rain and storms through Tulsa Town and up toward Chicago. We're going to have upper 80s down here later this week. I will be in a tank top and flip-flops later this week, and that, by the way, is not a good look. So let's go to Dr. Kim Clocoman.
As long as you have pants on with that.
Yeah. Let's go to Dr. Kim Cloco McLean, who is in Norman, Oklahoma. Rick could not make it tonight, so Kim, you're our exclusive Norman correspondent. Will any of this active weather affect you this week?
It may. We're in one of those situations where we're going to play the wait-and-see game for tomorrow. If we can get the right set of conditions tomorrow afternoon into the evening to get stuff to fire west of us, then yeah, we may be in trouble. So today's a day to be preparing for, and maybe that's what we're doing. Maybe he's out there cleaning out storm shelter. It's a well-known signal. If Rick is out there cleaning a storm shelter, we should all be getting ready. But today's a good day to prepare for. Tomorrow may bring. It's spring in Oklahoma.
Spring in Oklahoma, indeed. I'm so excited. I'm so excited that John Gordon will be with us every week. John, my heart is warm to seeing you on the screen, Hollywood Squares.
It's so nice to be with you guys. Thank you again. So for Kentucky, for all the Weather Brain listeners, this is a very bad weather week. All right. You're going to get, the world's rainfall record, James, 1 hour is in Holt, Missouri at 12 inches in 42 minutes. We're going to have 8 to 12 inches of rain in Kentucky this week. Severe weather, potentially really good event Wednesday night and Thursday. Very active weather. For the youngsters listening, this is going to be a busy week in the Ohio Valley.
It sure looks like it. The flooding threat is very real. I mean, this band just sets up and it just sits there. It doesn't look good. So with these synoptic scale flooding events that can be really, really problematic, and then you throw in the severe weather threat. It must be early April in Kentucky. I don't know. It's what happens here. Let's see here. I'm trying to see who else is joining us here. I think Jen is on the road this week. I know that Rick is out and Neil is out. But let's go to Bill Murray, who's going to bring in our guest for the evening. I feel good about this show, Bill.
Yeah, James, I'm like you. I had some dental work. I had a root canal today, so if I start drooling over here, you'll know.
You're kind of slurring your speech a little bit there.
Yeah, exactly. It's gotten much better. Hell made me some broccoli cheese soup, and it kind of helped to bring it back. But so far, so good. But
before we get started, can I ask James a question really quick?
Of course.
Just because I saw the social media earlier today, James, the tornado that hit the school over where was it, in eastern Alabama?
Dothan.
Yeah, tell me everybody was okay, that those were just injuries. I saw your social media.
Yeah, I think they're fine. What happened, I was actually doing a live stream. Of course, it's not my television market. This is the southeastern corner of Alabama, but I was on the live stream for about an hour and a half, and this popped up during the live stream. We had 2 tornadoes, one north of Dothan that was kind of in a rural area, and then one that just popped up, came right through the city, and then lifted. It apparently was small. The Weather Service in Tallahassee, that's their CWA, so they'll come in and do the survey. But it hit Dothan Preparatory School, which is a school, I want to say, that houses 7th and 8th graders. It's basically like a middle school in the Dothan City school system. And it's a fairly large facility, pretty large building. And a little part of the roof came off, and there was some trees down and some other damage. And of course, the first responders came in, and apparently there were just a couple of minor injuries, 2 or 3 minor injuries, no serious injuries. And I think they got the warning, and hopefully they were sheltered. There was not a lot of lead time, how these things are. This was a QLCS tornado, and we all know how fun those are. But there was a warning, and again, minor injuries, but they will not be in school for the rest of this week. But another scary situation, but nothing like Enterprise in 07, which was just down the road from Dothan. And there's a lot of analogies to that. And of course, that's going to set up the school closing debate again, which is a topic for another show.
And I thought about that.
Topic for another show. But you know me, my position is that for so many of those kids, the safest place is the school building.
Yes.
You release middle school kids home alone, the bus drops them off, they're not going to watch the weather, they're going to be playing video games or talking on their phone or whatever they do, and they're not going to be paying attention. And some of the kids go home to mobile homes, and they're home alone. And those are death traps during a tornado. So, but again, that's a debate for another day, Bill Murray, so I'm sorry.
But I appreciate you letting us. I saw it in your social media. My heart just kind of sank for a second that we had a school that was affected by it. Bill, I didn't mean to interrupt you and our guests tonight. So I just wanted to bring it up since I saw
interrupting TK. That is for sure. Whenever you introduce something, it's always important. But before we introduce tonight's guest, we want to give a special shout out to one of our faithful listeners, Elena D'Amico, who's been with us since 2019. Elena wrote in to suggest this evening's guests, sharing how much Carliana's work has impacted her and how she represents the next generation of passionate, thoughtful weather communicators. Elena, thank you for the kind words and for bringing tonight's conversation to life. Our guest tonight is Carliana, a fast-rising YouTube creator known for her deeply researched and emotionally resonant documentaries on high-end tornadoes. Her channel goes beyond the radar and statistics to tell the human stories behind these devastating events, combining strong narrative skills with a unique interest in global severe weather, particularly in underserved regions like India and China. Her work bridges science communication and empathy in a way that resonates with a new generation of weather enthusiasts. And Carly, it's nice to have you on the show. We tried to do this several months back and somehow it fell through, but I'm glad we persevered and made this. Especially young women, because they can see herself, they can see themselves in her, and we all admire her very, very, very much. Our show last week was a very important show, and
Kim, you know how hard that was for us, to get through that show.
Oh my gosh, it was. And what I love about our field is just this, that we are inspired by each other, and there's this whole chain of us, that the mentorship that goes forward. And Carly, I was feeling exactly the same way. Knowing you were coming on the show, I was so excited to meet you because of what you do. And I'm so excited to learn from you, but I also was so sad that Jen can't be here because I know she would have such wonderful questions and would just be delighted. So we're going to do the best we can in her stead, but nonetheless, we are absolutely delighted to learn from you tonight because what you're doing, it is so important, and I love that we're already getting fan mail from you. I think it's a record. And they're like, "Hey, man, this is gonna be one kind." Yeah.
Yeah, when I learned Jen wouldn't be able to join us today, I thought about reaching out to you and postponing, but I said, no, we're not doing it again, Carly. We're not messing this opportunity up. So Jen is, of course, on the road this week with her aunt. We got to see her when we did our 1000th show in Huntsville. And they're dodging severe weather outbreaks as they travel across the southern United States. So I think they're going to be glad to get back to Ohio, even though things may not be much better, John Gordon, in Ohio this week.
Might be just a tad wet.
I saw a lot of green on my weather maps today. So getting to know you, Carly, that's our goal. Tell us how you first became interested in weather and tornadoes.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in East Tennessee, and like most of the people who end up in this community, I grew up with some combination of fascination and fear with severe weather, and mine unfortunately leaned mostly towards fear of severe weather, and I had this really nerdy, intense obsession with weather that I always kept to myself because I thought how embarrassing it was to be afraid of weather as a kid, and I just didn't really know anything about it. And that really, I carried that with me pretty much until my adulthood, that storm of anxiety. I then moved to Atlanta for college and got a bachelor's degree from Georgia State University in English literature, funny enough, in 2021. And that really was about the time that I kind of sat down with myself at a certain point and thought, I need to get a hold of my storm anxiety. And while I had always loved weather and weather documentaries and things, I needed to learn about meteorology, and I needed to learn about severe weather parameters as a way to empower myself over that fear. And I cannot begin to express how unbelievably empowering and transformative that was for me to learn about meteorology and to take charge of it, my fear. So I started doing that, and I got up to a point where I just decided if there was ever a time where I was going to make really nerdy YouTube videos talking about tornado outbreaks, then that was the time. And I wanted to put my spin on it and my sort of obsession, I guess, which was the human element, how people felt afterwards from severe weather, whether that was PTSD or different traumas, or physical or mental, emotional, all these different injuries and things that people can experience after severe weather. So I kind of just really started there, and it hasn't stopped, I guess, since then.
So that's fascinating. Many of us share that. I share that with you, Carly, because I've told the story on here hundreds of times, probably more than our hosts and our panelists and our listeners care to admit that I went to bed the night of April 3rd, 1974, figuring I would never wake up, because I was so petrified of the weather, and it was so magnified that night. The reports were so horrendous. The radio reports and the weather bulletins were so shocking that I really literally turned the radio off about 1:30 and rolled over and thought, I won't wake up tomorrow. And it was amazing when I did, and I did like you at that point. I decided I'm going to learn everything I can about these things. I just found tonight the service assessment. This is not a tornado, but Hurricane Eloise. I saw the service assessment in the Weather Service in Birmingham, when I was, embarking on my learning, and I found it online tonight. I never got to see it again. Those experiences being at the National Weather Service as a 13, 14-year-old kid were so empowering. You don't get to do that as much today, but you have so much more. You've got the internet and so many other sources and access to so many people so readily. So what inspired you to do a YouTube channel? This is a different world today,
If I'm being
social media.
so honest with all of you, I was managing a bookstore after college. Always loved the weather. I still knew I wanted to learn and had actively been learning. But the pandemic closed the bookstore I was working at, and I didn't have a job, and I couldn't find a job. As many people were in that same situation. And it just kind of dawned on me one day that if I was going to nerd out and talk about something, then I wanted to do it in a sort of video documentary format. And just talk. And I was shocked that people even watched my first video, which was a video on Gerald. So it just happened that way. And like I said, it never stopped since then. And it still fascinates me that people watch, what I have to say anytime, honestly.
Well, I think there's a reason for that, but I think we just touched a nerve there. So let's go down that rabbit hole for a second, Troy Kimmel. You said Gerald, Texas, right? Is that the tornado you just mentioned that you did your first YouTube video about?
Yes.
So talk to us about that one for a minute, because I think you and Troy can get some conversation going here that we'll all be fascinated about. I was flying to Tucson, Arizona that day, and I remember looking out the left side of the airplane and looking at that thunderhead and thinking, oh my goodness, that must be a terrible thunderstorm, and having no idea what devastation it was creating on the ground. So talk about why you chose that storm, Carly, and what still strikes you about it, and then I want Troy to chime in.
Gerald, I was born in 95, so I wasn't, present during the happenings of Gerald. I honestly love talking about the events that are odd or mysterious in nature, sometimes macabre, that will attract me to wanting to speak about in a minute. And certainly the harder discussions to have about injuries and mental impacts and various traumas that come out of these events. And of course, unfortunately, sometimes that is associated with the more violent events that occur. And Gerald sort of ticked all those boxes for me in terms of being a very unique meteorological event that I could dive into and really just read about, because I love reading about them. It was macabre, it was sort of odd, the entire story. So for me, it was just more a fascination of how unique and odd that event truly was.
So Troy, talk about that experience in your life.
I was at Fox 7. I forget if we were CBS or Fox, but we were fixing to change if we hadn't already. So it'd be probably Fox 7 here in Austin that day. And that's not one of my prouder days. When it came down to it, we got the warning out and everything else. But I think Carly points out that day was not atypical as far as a tornado event in Central Texas is concerned. If you look at that day, the thing that I'll always remember, there are a couple of things that happened that day that still kind of, that I remember, is that morning getting up very early, doing some radio and things like that. I never forget, the dew points were in the upper 70s, and we don't see those here in Central Texas that much. It was just oppressively muggy, and there wasn't a particularly, I don't think, a big, the severe weather outlook was not that risk was there, but it wasn't a big risk, right, Carly? I mean, it was there, and part of that reason was we had a cold front moving down to the area with very little in the way of overall wind shear. There was not much going on up high on top of all this. It's interesting because as the day went along, our colleagues over at Texas A&M and some of the student colleagues that did this sort of thing and still do it, started sending some balloons up. We were starting to get county 2 east of there, capes in excess of 6,000 to 7,000. I mean, these kind of numbers. But we all thought, Carly, in a way, that any cells had developed. This actually got the Storm Prediction Center at the time. Well, yeah, Storm Prediction Center at the time, or maybe, it caught them by surprise, because I think the original track on any storms was scheduled to be kind of to the northeast, and even that would be pretty weak. But when those storms started developing and almost beginning to rotate immediately, they began to move southwest.
Yes, yeah.
And it just, and I had a speaking engagement that day down in LaGrange, Texas, and was driving back, and the first tornado watch was issued. And then I realized that it wasn't an hour later they issued one to the southwest. They had to reposition that tornado watch. I talked to the newsroom that day at 1:30, and I said, I just don't think those cells will come this far south along the interstate. And before we knew it, at 3:45 in the afternoon, we had those cells leaving Bell County to the north and moving into Williamson County and went through the city of Gerald. One thing that I learned, and I know John and there are other folks on this panel that realize this, it's unbelievable what we saw the next day in Gerald. And some people, and to this day, I still talk to people about what we saw, Carly, down there, and particularly the fact that they cordoned off the city of Gerald after that tornado for about 2 or 3 days, and actually a law enforcement officer was slugged. There was a guy trying to get back to his house, and I think frustration hit about 3 days, 2.5, 3 days later, and I think a law enforcement officer took a little punch to the face because this guy wanted in. And we had to come out and tell people that the reason that they weren't letting people in is this area was essentially it was a biologic hazard area, because there were not, you didn't find bodies, you found pieces of bodies. And I had some people, they had to go through and process. They had search and rescue teams march arm in arm with hefty bags, essentially evidence bags in their back pocket. And they would go along and they'd stop and they'd pick up a body part. One of the things that I remember was that Dr. Bardo, who was our medical examiner here in Austin for many years, about a week afterwards got back with the crew up there and said, well, I appreciate the tissue you sent us, but it was not part of a human, it was part of a cow, it was part of a cow stomach. And that was when I realized how bad in this, and this was not the strongest of the F5s. This was 270, so it wasn't at 318. But there are just so many things that, Carly, I remember for that day. And when you say that you looked at it as your first story on your podcast, I can understand why.
Slow moving, odd movement. I even read about, about meteorologists. And thank you so much for sharing that. That was such a powerful, that was so powerful to hear that. And it's part of it, I think. It's just so, it's hard for us to comprehend how something can cause such damage in such a way, how that impacts people and those families in that city and the officers who had to be there. And that was my, not attraction to the whole bit. Meteorologically speaking, it was odd. I read somewhere that perhaps a gravity wave influenced it to an extent, or I don't know, but it was odd. And just how do you comprehend that? I think part of my state of mind at the time was for my undergraduate, I did a lot of reading and writing for post-World War I society. So I think that for me, there was some sort of just kind of desire to go into the macabre and Gerald things that box for me.
Well, Carly, one thing, too, that I thought was interesting, and one moment that I'll remember that day with my good friend, Dick Ellis, who was our anchor person at Fox 7. Dick passed away a couple of years ago. But Dick and I were on the set at about 5 o'clock, and we got word from the Department of Public Safety from Gerald that we had at least 15 to 20 fatalities in Gerald. We ended up with 27. But I was on the set, and I said, how could that happen when there was a warning out, and all that sort of thing. And what we know now is it was a lower-end EF5. And there's just not, it taught me the lesson very quickly, Carly, that it's just very difficult to survive that type of tornado, that kind of intensity. And I remember going to set, I said, I don't forget, I think you used the word damn. I said, we have 15 to 20 fatalities, and the warning was out there, but I just wondered how it could happen. And I look back at it now in 2025, this number of years later, Carly, and I look at it and I fully understand how and why.
Yeah, and unfortunately there are several other events in recent history, as we all know, that draw sort of the same feelings as Gerald did. But yeah, it absolutely struck me. I'm always drawn to the, I always think about the aftermath of how those people deal with that, not just the victims, but their families. The people that have to see that, the people that weren't hit, but their neighbors were hit. I mean, just the trauma that stems from that is just, it radiates so far, just even from the initial impact.
That was the Double Creek Estates subdivision, James, up in Tulsa. I'll tell you something else, Carly, too, and you talk about things, and Kim, I do remember a little bit about this. I think I just tried to block it out a little bit, but one family that we lost, Gerald, was the Igo family. Entire family followed the two boys, brought their parents into the restroom, pulled a mattress in on top of them over on the bathtub, and everyone in the house was killed. Well, we found out that there was a close relationship, as in closely related, to a person at the Weather Service in New Braunfels at the time. So that was even that, and we sat there and went, my gosh, it just, and then of course that storm continued, not even the same supercell, but another thunderstorm produced another tornado in northwest Austin, which we were very fortunate, did not kill anyone out towards Cedar Park, Texas, and then we had one more fatality a little further west out toward Lake Travis, that being again that same or another tornado, and that is also another scary story with that one, because we don't really know the circumstances. A young man, 25 years of age, trailer home, was hit. He was found probably 2 miles from his house, no clothes, body just wadded up, and that's the other fatality that occurred that same day too. It's not the same tornado as Gerald, but there were just lots of things about that day that still today they affect me. So, but and that's why when you said that, Carly, I'm sitting there going, no surprise at all with that, because that was a very unique tornado, and not one that necessarily, as I think we've said, so a lot of my colleagues had said, not one that necessarily sat down, John, and read the meteorology textbooks about what it's supposed to do, because it was sitting there going, no, don't think I'll do that. I think I'll do this. Pretty unique storm.
I'm really impressed by what you do, and I also echo Troy's comments about Gerald. I was at just south of James over the weekend at CCAP's Mobile. Tim Marshall was there, and Tim Marshall and I were both talking about this obsession, and it's the word obsession. What is the strongest tornado, and why is there no 5s, and why is there no 4s? So, Carly, you can have a 300-mile-per-hour tornado in a field, and what did it do? It did nothing. But you can have Gerald, which was moving southwest at 4 miles an hour with a 6,000 K. John Hart from SPC believes that it was started as a gustnado. There was a lot of theories on how it actually started. Once it started, it wasn't going to end. And your stories are really important, because I like to take youngsters, a lot of youngsters listen to this show right now. I like to take severe weather nuts who just think this is great. And then James brought up earlier Enterprise. And when you go to Enterprise, Alabama, or Henryville, or Gerald, Texas, or Joplin, it's not good.
No.
It's not good at all. And I'm thankful for your stories and what you do. You've got a great niche, because people need to understand these are real people. These are real homes. Devastation. I have seen so many bad things, it's hard to sleep.
And what you all do, having to be there and be in the real physical, I would fall apart, and that's the truth, and not everyone can handle that. I get emotional talking about things that didn't even happen to me, and so I have such a high degree of respect for what you all do, and John, thank you, that's so kind. It really is about the individual people that experience these in homes, and it does not take a Gerald, it does not take a Joplin for these people to experience. My personal anecdote is that my hometown was hit by EO2. I wasn't impacted, and I still have severe swarm anxiety from that experience. I have people message me every day talking about their experience with trees falling, with different things that have actually traumatized them, and they have a hard time with swarm anxiety. Not to mention the people that have homes blown away, they lose loved ones, they lose a limb, and they can't work anymore. They tear their rotator cuff, they're out of a job, and everything collapses. So those are the things that I really just want people to even think about. I know there's not always things that we can do to remedy those situations, but for me, seeing the abundance of fear-mongering and hyping up EF5s and different things on and the rating obsession, to me, is just so, it's hard to see. I know not everyone participates in the community, but it is difficult for me to think about as someone who has swarm anxiety for a lot of people that are actually physically and mentally going through these things.
James,
Absolutely.
you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, and I dropped in chat, but it's always important to remember and stress to people that always be on the side of the people, not the hazard. My question is more of a physics question, and this seems like something that the National Institute for Standards and Technology, who does those, the big, thick after reports. How does it differ when you've got a tornado moving at, what's the wind load difference or wind damage difference, or is there an equivalence relationship between a very slow moving, weaker tornado where those winds are acting on something for much longer, or a fast moving, stronger tornado?
That is a great question, and I wish I had a great answer to give to you, James. I wouldn't know how to answer it. I have a really good friend in this space who is an engineer by trade. His name is Ethan Moriarty, who does these types of damage analysis with his background. And I always think of him with these questions, and I wish I could defer to him now.
Well, you know, one thing too, Carly and James in Tulsa, so much it depends, and this is where the enhanced Fujita scale is so important. So much depends on what you're damaging. You know, that building even tied to its foundation? You know, and so many different other matters that are part of that. But I think it's a great question, but I wonder how complicated it would be to answer it.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Something, Carly, that I think I'm struck by with where you chose to start was you did choose to start with a tornado that was odd in these ways. It was slow moving, as Troy talked about. There were all the heartbreaking, particular situations that went on. When you decided to embark on this endeavor to try to tell the human story, what made you choose Gerald?
I think going back to just having recently graduated and having read so much literature on World War I and the absolute physical devastation that came from World War I with automatic weapons and weapons of mass destruction, I think I was just in the headspace of something that was somewhat graphic. But I mean, with Gerald, it absolutely just horrified me what officers and paramedics and the community had to deal with, and it just stuck with me. I think that stuck with me for weeks. I had read any event I do, if there's a publication afterwards on any recommendations or surveys, whatever documentation comes out, I'm always reading it. And so for me, going back and reading the documentation for Gerald, I'm just horrified, and I couldn't stop thinking about it in a way that is graphic and horrible in a lot of ways. And I just felt so bad for the people that lived remotely in that area. And I really just, it stuck with me so much in the way that Joplin sticks with you, in the way that More 2013 sticks with people, in terms of how horrifying that must be.
Yeah, I raised the question. You know, you've mentioned your interest in the macabre, and there are a lot of. I mean, tornadoes can really easily lend themselves to that material. And something that I really appreciated about where you chose to start was that it wasn't, you know, one of the more recent, you know, big disasters. You went back a little bit, and it's not one that I think is in the popular lexicon. It's in the like, for meteorologists, you see Gerald, we kind of know what that is, but it's not the same thing as like Moore, Oklahoma.
Police reported ahead.
Meteorologists, you see Gerald, we kind of know what that is, but it's not the same thing as like Moore, Oklahoma, or, you know, the Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And I appreciate that you did that. I wonder, when you set out then to try to tell the stories, it could be a little bit harder. You're going back a little bit further. I mean, I know the 90s wasn't forever ago. I hope the 90s wasn't forever ago. I'm going to date myself. Like I was like a full person in the 90s. So I hope it wasn't forever ago. But when you go back in time a little bit, it starts to get more challenging to find people. How did you do it? How did you approach the entire task?
It's a great question, and I love this question. It's a great observation, actually. I refuse to talk about the most recent events, and that is simply because in many ways, I feel guilty for talking about events that have traumatized people beyond words, and it makes me, who am I to speak on someone else's experience? And so I have sort of this unspoken rule with myself that I refuse to talk about events that are like 10 years and less. I refuse to talk about More 2013. I've talked about Hackleburg, and it makes me cry. You know, I read this stuff, and it's emotional, and it's horrible, and it's hard, and I think that was one of the most recent ones I did. I will not be talking about someone's 10-year or less experience, particularly from my lens that I want to speak on, which is the societal. Let's zoom it out. I'm not trying to look at the velocity couplet from yesterday. I want to take this back to the 10,000 foot level and talk about what societal elements shape this event. You know, how are these people recovering? How do the socioeconomics play a role in the recovery process? Some of these people don't even recover, and so that has always been my angle of, I'm not trying to talk about an event because it's graphic or macabre. It so happens that I'm interested in it at times. My more important angle is to make sure that I'm not talking about a recent tragedy that cannot even be analyzed from a 10,000 foot level. So that's, Kim, to answer your question in a very long-winded way, that is my sort of unspoken rule for myself. So I actually love going back into the 90s, 80s, 70s, you know, finding as much stuff as I can. I love the broadcast television from older decades. So to me, it's like a win-win, actually.
Sorry guys, I know there's a queue of questions that are teeing up, but I love that is your motivation as a social scientist also, because when you get more time after an event, you do have more data, and you can look at things with that bigger picture lens. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more from you about how, you know, when you've...
In 6.1 miles. Stay to the right to I-35E north toward Dallas.
Conditions, the things that sort of set the stage for what becomes a disaster. There's a popular saying among disaster scholars, there's no such thing as a natural disaster. Everything is the confluence of the physical factors and all of what's going on in society. And that's a fascinating piece that you're trying to bring into this that I really honestly don't often see done in this kind of documentary work. Tell us a little bit more about your approach to that.
Well, thank you so much, Kim. That's so kind. This is why I was so excited to talk to you. I really just, I never really I look at events for the meteorological data, to be honest, it's cool, it's there, I like it, but it's not a motivating factor. I tend to like the events where there is a story behind the recovery. So, for example, Joplin is a beautiful story of recovery. They've had a really well done documentary on it, and it's a beautiful story the way that they were able to recover. A lot of places don't. So for me, I tend to gravitate towards maybe some of the events that people didn't recover. It wasn't necessarily a happy ending. They're still struggling, or there's so many different socioeconomic factors. I tend to like is not the right word, but I tend to like events in the Southeast because there are so many different elements of disparities in education, healthcare, income levels, people's access to shelter. It's all those things are kind of things I take into consideration when wanting to look at an event, and also whether or not there's publications done. I'm not trying to put my spin on things. I want to just take what the researchers have done, like the National Weather Service has done, and amplify. They've done studies, post-mortem type studies. So I hope that was a adequate answer to your question.
Oh, no, and sorry guys, I don't mean to monopolize. I'll tell you what, really quick, super aside. You guys have your stuff about Gerald. I have a different one, and it was from my own time as an undergraduate. In the early aughts, I was doing an economics degree, and I was studying the economic index of tornadoes. And part of it, I had a data set from one of the economics professors where I was able to look at indebtedness, so trends in how far behind people are falling in their payments, 30 days, 60, and so on. And I studied Gerald. That was one of the events that I picked because the data was from Oklahoma and Texas, and in that time range. And I did see that indicator of what I suspected to be like a lack of recovery. I mapped out for different places. I studied the May 3rd, 99 event too, and there were geographic patterns to recovery where the urban core did better than the rural surrounding areas, and that sort of reinforced what I later learned to be a certain economic model of like economic development, like a core periphery model. And to see that was just jarring, and it did get me thinking about, gosh, what went on down there? But I didn't have that informant interview perspective where I was really talking with people who had been affected. So to hear you say that you're gravitating towards some of these, that's one of the more interesting things that our field doesn't often get into a lot, because we often find ourselves in the position of we are there to help warn people and try to stave off the disaster as much as we can. And afterwards, that's not necessarily the province of meteorology to be there for the recovery, although we clearly are concerned with it. Our heart is with people. We've all loved following things like the remarkable recovery of Greensburg, Kansas, which, make Greensburg green. Like it's this wholesale retooling of the entire town. And I think there's a really important set of stories to be told about the places that don't necessarily recover and why. And I could make political statements about things that are happening now that could affect that landscape. We know that there's certain kinds of recovery programs that are being axed. So I think I just want to say your work is filling a distinct void in our conversation space where we really need it. And so if you want to say more about, if you have some examples of people you've talked with who maybe have struggled to recover, what's going on behind that? What has made it tough?
That's a great example. I get so many emails of people who have experienced the lower end tornadoes that, a lot of times FEMA or different charities and different charities will come in and help, but there's only so much that can be done. I can't pinpoint when. I was actually watching a great Peter Santinello video the other day, and James will probably have some great insight on this. And he was going through rural Alabama, and he happened across Selma, Alabama, and he just ends up going through Selma, interviewing people, and he comes across this, to him, seemingly very strange damage, and homes are sort of torn apart. This is late 2024, maybe early this year. And he tries to go
in 1 mile. Use the right 3 lanes to stay to the right to I-35E north toward Dallas.
And areas there that are not doing so great. And they, he interviews the people living in these homes, and they said, FEMA did come in. There was a ton of help in Selma. And we know that, James, I know you are very close with this event. And even still, there's only so much that can be done for these people after with government or smaller entities. So I think you will probably have a lot more to speak to on a Selma event specifically, but it was eye-opening to me. It just happened across that literally in a random video that I watched.
Here's the thing. I know it's not my turn, Bill. I'm sorry. I jump in.
It's always your turn, James Van. You're the host.
I jump in at random times here, but so there's a town north of Selma called Plantersville, Alabama. I bet you nobody on the show's ever heard of it.
Stay to the right to I-35E north toward Dallas.
I've heard of it. It's in northern Dallas County, Alabama, on the banks of Mulberry Creek, the creek that separates Dallas County from Watauga County. I can close my eyes. I can dip my toes in that water. I've been there so many times. And they were hit hard back on March 15th of this year, just a couple of weeks ago. And I rearranged my schedule. My first school opening is in 2027. I've got schools booked until the day I die. But I moved some things around so I could go down to the small elementary school, J.E. Terry Elementary. They had 109 students, 98% free lunch, very low-income part of the state. And this was an EF3 that came through, so Saturday night, April 15th. And my concern is that they're going to be totally forgotten. And really, the media never even told the story. Never. At least with Joplin and Moore and Tuscaloosa, people talk about it for weeks and months and years. But what about Plantersville? Is their life any less important because you live in a rural area, a low-income area? No, every life is precious. And my concern is that nobody's going to care. Nobody cares, and nobody's going to help them. So I just felt impressed to go down there and see those kids and talk with them, which is what I do. I do children's ministry. That's what I do. And I have started the ball rolling to get the school some help, to get the community some help, and let's get in there and fix this thing. And that's what I like. It's therapy for me. I'll put it that way. In a way, it's selfish, but and I agree, Carly. My biggest concern is the stories that are never told to start with, and the stories that don't have a good ending. And nobody likes to hear those. And so I appreciate what this discussion is all about. I think our hearts are beating in parallel.
So James, you were going to jump in. Do you still want to talk about the scenario that you brought up?
I don't remember what I was going to say. Oh, it was the Princess Halifax.
I hijacked the show.
That's your show. You can hijack it. Prince did a study on the explosion in Halifax Harbor, which is kind of the start of disaster science. But he was there, Anglican priest, and ended up doing his doctoral dissertation in Columbia from it. But to get back into the recovery talk, because that's far more important too in this, everybody has a different path they're on. Some people don't have the ability to recover at all. And I think that's what one of the things, James, you mentioned. I saw that in Barnesville about 4 weeks ago when we had the EF4 tornado just 20 miles northwest of downtown Tulsa. A lot of the folks there did not have insurance because those houses were inherited. And it's who steps up? How do you get help? I walked through the east side of Barnesville and there is very little reconstruction going on. And it's just heartbreaking. And even if you can recover, what is recovery? How do you know? Have you recovered? Or will you recover? Is there recovery? When do you get normal again? I mean, these are just incredibly long-term effects from something that is usually a very quick event.
That's a really great point. What is recovery? How do you define recovery? We all know it's not black and white. It's extraordinarily nuanced for people. Not to be the dead horse, I really think about the people that their dad lost his leg and doesn't have a job. He's the breadwinner. What does the family do? Long term. This is a long term. This is beyond even the physical. Your house being rebuilt. Or the people that are so extraordinarily traumatized by incidents that happen to them, they can't function the same way. Or let alone a thunderstorm coming through. I've spoken with veterans, with Army veterans, military veterans that weren't impacted by severe weather, but when a severe thunderstorm comes by, they're certainly impacted by that from their trauma. So what is recovery is such a great question, and I think what's hard for all of the people in the weather enterprise is that we don't have the answers to that, and there's not one singular answer to that question, and it's hard to know that this happens every single year for all of us here having to go through. And think about these people that are impacted, knowing that there's a chance that they may not recover in the way that we would hope that they would, and that's the really difficult part, truthfully, about being in this community year after year.
And such a huge part of it is the economic disparity, and you mentioned that, Carly. There was a man, and I don't know if James, if you saw this story, but who lived in the little town of Calera that was hit that same night here. A little tornado spun up and went through the downtown area and hit a little mobile home park there. And this man, who probably lived paycheck to paycheck, got a little extra money, went down to see his insurance agent the day before the tornado and said, why don't you put some, and ask his agent, could we put some renter's insurance on my mobile home? And the very next night, as he and his daughter sat in that mobile home, it was blown to bits. And, it probably, here's this man who just got a little ahead, enough to pay for an insurance policy. And now it's like he won the lottery. That economic disparity is so disheartening. There's another side of Selma. Selma has a big pilgrimage every year. A lot of, homes, people come back to visit them. And a lot of those homes were damaged. And I saw an article, in a magazine just this week, that was, patting themselves on the back for getting those homes back in place. And there you go. You see that economic disparity because, maybe a half mile away, there's homes with tarps still on them. And it's, it really is a troubling part of, our society today, that economic disparity. So, and James, what you said in the chat is so important because we have to take care of our most vulnerable citizens. And I've seen that. How far have you gone back, Carly? You said 70s. Is that as far as you've gone back in doing stories?
Oh gosh, I had a real obsession with the Enigma outbreak.
Oh wow, you really went back.
It's back when I started doing
that's when John James was just an intern.
starting my career back then.
Yeah, I've done the 74 super outbreak. I've done.
Watch out. Vehicle on shoulder.
Was that 60?
That was Bill Curtis, wasn't it? Wasn't it, James?
Yes.
Was that Bill Curtis? Was that his?
Yeah.
I've done a couple. Like I said, I love it. If I can find some information from it, I'm digging in. I love it because to me it feels like I'm less guilty about speaking on someone else's recent family trauma. Essentially, is how I feel about it.
I found when I studied the 1932 outbreak in Alabama, and I did a lot of research, about a year of interviews, recorded them and their treasures, because a lot of those people are not with us anymore.
The history is so important. That's why I so adore you and Jen for the work that both of you do for tornado history. I have my significant tornadoes book back here, and I adore both of you for preserving this history. It's so important to me and to the space. It's very appreciated.
But you go back and you understand that was a very tough time in the United States and in Alabama in 1932, was the depths of the Depression. And I was looking for those stories, and when I was, because I was looking for those kind of impacts, people whose lives were set back. And I found the opposite in a lot of cases. I found that neighbors pulled together a lot more. And I'm not saying we don't today, we still do. Obviously, the best comes out in Oklahoma. You see it after every big event. You see it in Alabama in a lot of ways. People come together. But it was truly a different type of community back in 1932 because people's homes that were blown apart were being rebuilt the following afternoon. They worked together to do that. And that's not as possible for us anymore, in most areas. So we've kind of lost that. But it was kind of, encouraging and empowering to see that, people didn't get down. They just pulled themselves up by the bootstraps and went out and made something happen.
The tri-state was another great one, but I love what you mentioned, and I hope I'm not going to derail this whole thing, but it made me...
We spend our entire time being derailed. That's what we do.
Wonderful.
We take this thing down the tube
every week. Yeah.
Every Monday.
So we had sort of had a small pre-discussion before coming live here about cry wolf effect, complacency, and some recent AMS publications that I had read, which are my two most recent videos on my channel. And there was some sort of discussion in these AMS publications on the idea that residents, and I'm sorry for derailing this, that residents of the Southeast were kind of contrary to popular belief, quite resilient to severe weather and sheltering when it pertains to the cry wolf effect and the high FAR, which I think is somewhere in the 74% area. And so I say all this.
It varies from office to office, absolutely.
Would you say 74 is a decent? What would you say is a decent characterization for average?
Well, I have to be careful here because I'll get ourselves.
Hard to say. I'm sorry.
some offices. John Gordon, you gave some statistics when you're talking Valpo, but throw out some numbers. John's got the numbers. He's got the real numbers.
Well, and most people don't know this, and it all really started with James. Honestly, talking to the Birmingham office, they have the best stats in the nation. People get mad when I say that. It's just like who shoots free throws. Everyone knows who's a good free throw shooter. And no one gets upset. Maybe Shaq does, but anyway. Numbers nationally, most offices are in the 0.7 to 0.8 FAR. There are some over 0.8. It's a dirty little secret, and it started with James and Louisville and St. Louis and others are changing our mindset to put better people in the better positions. And the numbers, right, James? The numbers in Birmingham have come way down.
Everybody in a weather service office has strengths and weaknesses. Everybody. And you've got to put people where they're really strong. And that's one of the things they did here, that they changed the way they staffed events, and they went back to basic science. They were issuing warnings for these high base storms that would never produce a tornado, never. They just cut it at these high LCLs.
But James, that all started, that basically started with a staff meeting, I understand, in Birmingham a while back. And you know what, I'll even tell you this, and I won't surprise anyone on this panel to hear what I'm going to say, but as I always understood that discussion of that meeting, they encouraged their staff to critically think and to sit there and look. When I'm looking at this, they encourage their staff to think on their own, and that's my opinion anyway. I've always admired people in Birmingham for what they did for them. So.
And I'll just say this really quick, Carly. So we don't want to have the boy cried wolf and Kim, right? So it's kind of like this. This is what I told my staff. James will like this. When you go to your staff, say, how many of you think you're a really good driver? Everyone says, well, on a 0 to 10, I'm a 9. I don't flip anyone off. I use my turn signals. If it's allowed, I never speed. Then they ask their most significant other, how's my driving?
Oh.
0. They cut everyone off because they scream or whatever. Everyone is not good on radar. James Spann is the gold standard for communication on the screen. Okay, James is not doing social media in the corner. Right, the best in your best places, and the numbers, Harley. The numbers in Birmingham, to me, have shined a light that this can be addressed effectively.
Yeah, when a warning comes from the National Weather Service in Birmingham, we immediately pay attention at a higher level than at any other office. And I hate to say that because we should pay the same attention to all of them. But
again, I want to say in 2011, the FAR was a 0.82 in Birmingham.
That when you appeared on the front page of the newspaper?
We're better than that. No, we're better than that. We're better than that. And Kevin and his team have done just this incredible job of getting in there under the hood, changing the way they staff events, putting people where they're gifted to serve in those positions to make it work. And everybody's got a strength and weakness. And again, I'm hoping that culture change will begin to affect other offices. Where I don't know what it is in Birmingham today. Kevin's probably listening to the show and he would know, but it's probably a 0.29 or a 0.3 right now. I never thought it would be that low in my entire life. So, Carly, there's a long answer to your question. I'm sorry.
No, please. This is a really wonderful discussion. I could listen to forever about this. It was a long-winded and way to go to Bill's point, which the FAR is a whole other conversation too. But to the point that this AMS publication that was speaking on the cry wolf effect and the resiliency of residents in the Southeast, they made some suggestions at the end, which I found interesting. So Bill is calling to the idea that neighbors would help each other before and after the storm in 1925. And this AMS article actually suggested that perhaps a solution to a community level or individual level way to help lower the mortality rates was that permanent home residents would go out to those who live in mobile homes in areas where there's not public social homes and offer their home, which I thought, wow, it almost seems odd for people to do that in 2025, but I hope that we could get back to a community like that where people feel comfortable going to a mobile home park and say, hey, I've got a basement, and maybe that happens and I just don't, I never heard about it, but I just kind of thought of it being a different time and where you wouldn't think that would happen, but I hope that would be something that could start to.
Let me just say this too. I mean, and Bill, I think you're about to say the same thing I'm going to say. We've got a church on every corner.
Yeah, same thing. Our churches are so powerful. You know,
A church is on every corner in the state. And if we can somehow get the church involved to open up and allow mobile home residents to come in and take shelter in their basement or in an interior hallway or in a bathroom or closet or whatever.
or just in the other members of site-built homes, students. You know, we're all going to church. You know, and a lot of times in those places like Plantersville, you know, you probably have folks in close proximity that have greater economic disparity that could do that and say, hey, you know, hey Joe, you know, I love your mobile home. It's beautiful. And I'm not supposed to say mobile home. I'm supposed to say manufactured home or whatever. But you know.
No. They call them trailers. That's what they call it. They call them trailers. And I've been called a bigot.
I know they do call them that. It drives me crazy because Stephen Schrader says I'm not supposed to call them that. You know.
No, I've been called a bigot and a phobe and all this other stuff, denier, for calling them trailers. But that's what they call them. You go and talk with them. I speak their language.
My aunt lived in one until I was 15 years old. Exactly. But, you know, if you go to your friend and say, hey, come over to our house, you know, when this thing comes through, because we, you know, our house is safer. It's a site-built home, or maybe we have a tornado space. You know, I couldn't go to sleep last night. I was supposed to go to sleep at 9 o'clock so I could get back up at 1 and cover the weather. And I saw the storm heading for Williamson County, and my business partner lives in Fairview, Tennessee. And, you know, I immediately, as soon as I saw that storm was on a path for their house, you know, I knew that I was not going to be able to sleep till that storm was past them. And so, you know, I sent, you know, Ryan a text, and they were already on top of it, you know. They already had the kids, you know, we're going to pull them down, and we're going to go to their safe spot. And I walked them through that tornado, you know, and it ended up touching down in Williamson County. You know, and so I thought this was interesting, Kim, and I want to hear this because I dreaded texting Ryan and saying, hey, you're going to have to do this. And he sent me a little video of his family, you know, in their safe place. And the son looked traumatized. And I said that to Ryan today when I was talking to him on the phone. I was like, you know, was Rooney okay? And he said, you know, yeah, he was nervous, you know, but, you know, we had some games and we did some fun things. And so I thought, you know, as many times as you've had to go into that, because I think there's some geographic path for tornadoes through there, because they seem to get them where he lives. And, you know, I said, you know, are you just really sick and tired of having to do this? And he said, no, we make it a fun time. You know, we make it a family time, because I don't want them to be scared of storms. He's from Kansas, and he's used to tornadoes. And so, you know, coming down here, they're just different. We just can't see them. They're at night, and, you know, they're hard to see. But, so Kim, I think you want to get into what Carly was talking about even more, unless we already did it, you know. Maybe not. Okay.
Oh, yeah, no, I do.
Watch out. Vehicle on shoulder ahead.
Maybe not. Okay.
Oh, yeah, no, I do, very much. The paper that she was keying in on was Dr. Lamb, a paper that was looking at is the false alarm effect really is profound, as we suspect, as we assume that it is. And this has been a long-held debate in the social sciences. We've talked about it on this show before, that the evidence is very mixed. There are a lot of reasons for it being mixed. Something that you just brought up, though, Bill, I think is a really material part of it. There's a question of, do you have a place to go that's easy to access?
Exactly.
And that's something that in the Southeast U.S. where you...
Watch out. Vehicle on shoulder ahead.
Something that in the Southeast U.S. where you have a paradigm of, you know, these are less predictable environments, so you have lower lead times very often for QLCS tornadoes. I mean, this is why Birmingham struggled for so many years. They were trying to get the same kind of probability of detection as you get with the supercell thunderstorm in Oklahoma, and you're just not going to live in that same reality. They're less predictable environments. In the physical sciences, there are some people who advocate for, we need to have a whole other set of skill scores for places that are harder to predict than places that are easy to predict. Why are we doing apples to apples on these things? But that's a whole other conversation. But in the Southeast, when I've gone there, what I've seen is you'll have populations of people who live in mobile manufactured housing. You have this preponderance of slight risks where they know it's going to be a martial event, possibly nocturnal, like these things that are just really hard to leave your house for, and even if it is going to a church, like those are often 10, 15 minutes away. What you also see in the Southeast, there's another body of research that, like Stephen Strader, the kind of stuff he's looked at with Kevin Ash, where they've looked and seen the people in the Southeast, they don't tend to live in parks of mobile homes. They live on properties where they have, right, there's like a site-built home and then surrounded by like family that lives on the property in mobile homes or something similar. And so when they mapped it out using GIS, it's the case that it's so much easier for somebody to get to a site-built home, because there actually are a lot of site-built homes very close to mobile manufactured housing in even rural parts of Alabama where the population density is higher, and you just have you have people who are more populous on the landscape. So it makes more sense to think about sheltering in a very different kind of paradigm, and that's been enshrined in Alabama law, the Safer Places law, where there's a reduction in the liability if you're going to shelter somebody and you're not like a FEMA-rated shelter, but you're better than something else that somebody has. Then they allow you to not be liable if someone gets injured in your home. You can't stop all things from going badly, but you can help somebody. This is a really important question, and I think this is something that was really interesting about that paper that Carly referenced, that right before the pandemic, there was this whole slew of us that were trying to advocate for this, that this you can do better by trying to encourage people to just have, use the social safety net of the relationships that we have. We have the materials we need to keep people safe, almost perfectly safe. Survival rates, even in the worst tornadoes, in site-built homes are extremely high. If we can just get people out of mobile homes, we're going to be doing so much better. And it's so burdensome if you live in a mobile home to have to go to these facilities time after time after time, day after day, slight risk after slight risk, nocturnal event after nocturnal event. You just can't do it. I encountered people in the Lee County event. I went and talked with folks after March 3rd, 2019. And that was what had happened there. There had been days of slight risk events where they just had to have this whole, do I go and spend the entire day over at my in-laws? Like, I can't do this day after day. And you do something where you're just closer, like your next door neighbor, if you can just duck in and cover really fast instead of having to spend your whole day sheltering, like a county away or something, is just it's something that's much more equitable for the people who need access to something. So these are really important conversations. And Carly, I'm curious, when you covered this in your work, how did you cover it? Tell us a little bit more about in your podcast, like sort of in your what you're trying to construct about the whole of society responding to these things. How did you treat this paper and those recommendations? How did you weave that into your narrative?
Yeah, well, Kim, I could listen to you talk all day, but I'm so fascinated with. Oh my gosh, yeah, amazing. With anything that I approach, be it meteorological information or publications like this, AMS or advanced publications, I want the paper to speak for itself, and I want to present it in a way that I'm not making assertions on what I have opinions, certainly. I've lived in the Southeast my whole life. But I try not to insert any anecdotal evidence, and I just want to present the abstract in the paper in a way that is publicly consumable for people who, in a 20-minute format as much as I can, uplift this beautiful piece of social science, and just uplift that voice, and maybe for this case specifically challenge the idea that people in the Southeast are not complacent, never shelter during tornado warnings, or excuse me for saying something dumb, but I mean, I've seen so many people slander essentially the residents of the Southeast as being non-compliant and only ever sitting out on their porch during tornado warnings, and I would love to challenge that idea because I certainly don't think that's true. And I really wanted to present that to the people of the Southeast because they are vigilant. And this paper really, to me, was like, yeah, they are vigilant and they do shelter. And maybe the larger issue here that we should be talking about isn't whether or not they're going to shelter. We know it's an individual risk perception decision, but how can we just make sure that people in communities have access to shelter? And I know that's a super nuanced conversation, but presenting in the research in a way that challenges kind of the idea of what people, the assumptions that people place on Southerners, essentially, and letting the research kind of speak for itself. I hope that was an adequate answer for that question.
Do you take that personally, being a Southerner yourself? It's fascinating that you cast that so specifically as, like, a sense of protectionism. Is it?
I've seen it, like all of you here probably have in your areas, I've seen both sides. I grew up in East Tennessee, and I think my personal opinion is that people joke a lot about not sheltering during severe weather, but when that tornado's coming, I know that people know what to do, and I know that people will do that, and I have the faith in the residents of the Southeast that we sure do joke about it a lot, but at the end of the day, these are vigilant people, and what's so interesting about them is they may not know the meteorological data, they have that God-given intuition of that tornado weather, and they listen to it, and I think it's a really beautiful thing about people in the Southeast. Not to speak for everybody, there are certainly some outliers there, but I have faith in the people of the South.
We're not all a bunch of morons.
I saw Bill's mouth moving. I figured he had something profound to say. Sorry, Bill.
Yeah, I was muted there. Yeah. How do you see yourself inspiring a future generation of weather communicators and creators?
Oh, that's an ambitious question.
It's probably not what you started out to do, but now you're getting that opportunity.
Like I said, it blows my mind that people listen to me. If I wanted to give anything to anybody, it's just to challenge them to think more, to think beyond just the initial news cycle. To think a little bit more about the human element of what people experience. I'm not saying people have to be freaks about socioeconomics of tornadoes like I am, but I think at least thinking a little bit more outside of just the statistics and EF5 ratings and the holy cow, look at that velocity couplet aspect of this community, and push people to really think about people who have disabilities or who are disadvantaged, or we could go down the line of different things. So that's if I could give anyone anything, it would be that.
Well, Carly, I can easily see why it is that people love listening to you. Thank you for the voice that you give to people and your attention. And I'm not surprised that this has turned into a lot of a love fest for us doing the show. Sorry that irritates people, but I suspected it was going to happen. But something that I really appreciate about your approach, too, is something I also emulate in my own work after disasters. You talking about you're not going to go in and cover a place that's had a disaster until some time has passed. This is also a deeply held value I have. I don't go into an immediate disaster zone when people are, still in crisis. And
rising throughout the month. This is because the moon, sun, and planets are all moving along the same area of the sky. An invisible line known as the ecliptic. This is the path that the sun takes through the sky. Conjunctions happen so often because the moon makes its way around this line every 29 days. Even though they're far from rare, they're still worth looking up for. Just the fact that the moon provides a nice guidepost to help find the planets in the vastness of the night sky. Now, the moon next passes Venus, Saturn, and Jupiter at the end of this month, all within just a couple of degrees. But the conjunction to mark your calendar for is on June 29th, when the moon and Mars will be separated by just 12 minutes, or less than a quarter of a degree, about half the angular diameter of the moon. Another event, which sadly isn't as predictable as conjunctions, but is worth keeping an eye out for, are fireballs. These are unexpected meteors burning up high in the atmosphere, so high that they're visible from several states in each direction. Fireballs are meteors that are brighter than the planet Venus. They don't always happen during meteor showers. Last week, fireballs were seen above upstate New York, northern Florida, north and South Carolina, and there was one above Knoxville, Tennessee, with more than 60 detailed reports from observers spanning from Augusta, Georgia, to Detroit, Michigan. A great place to look up information on a given fireball is amsmeteors.org. You can also report a fireball you've seen there, providing details that will help triangulate its path. At your astronomy outlook, follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
Well, tonight's show brings together two people who care deeply about saving lives through better weather communication, each in their own way. We've talked to Carly tonight, whose storytelling and documentaries bring the human depth and the global perspective to the impact of tornadoes, reminding us that behind every one of our data points is a person, a family, a community. And now we welcome Bruce Jones, a meteorologist, senior advisor of weather communications with Midland Weather Radio, Midland USA. Bruce, who spent his career on the front lines of preparedness and a timeless advocate for NOAA Weather Radio, the sort of indoor tornado siren, if I can use that sort of bad word, that he's worked for decades to ensure that people always receive life-saving tornado warnings, especially during overnight storms when they're most vulnerable. So, Bruce, we've had a lot of fun talking to Carly tonight. We always look forward to talking to you in the spring because you always bring a good story, in addition to just...
We saw it again in the '74 super outbreak, and in the aftermath of that, representatives from the state of Kentucky and Washington, D.C. Went to President Gerald Ford and said, look, we've got to do something about this. So they took this nascent weather radio network and turned it into the official voice of the National Weather Service. And now 50 years later, we've seen time after time when everything else fails, the radio still works. Your TV goes out because the electricity goes out. Your nearest
That WR120, Bruce, is an affordable piece of technology. It's easy to use, it's easy to program, and you've got a special deal for Weather Brains listeners, so they can get it even more affordable.